Hey all! Today we are back on the Oldsmobile. That's right, after way too long a delay, we're going to get some work done on this thing again. For those of you who haven't been around long enough to have encountered this before directly, this is my 1956 Oldsmobile Super 88 Holiday 4-door. Holiday means it's a hardtop, there's no pillar between the two windows when the glass is down. I bought this as a long-term project. The goal with this is to build a late 50s style custom. Basically, I want something that looks like either somebody got the car from his dad and turned it into something cool, or bought it as a used car in the late 50s and put their custom touch on it. It's going to have custom features throughout, but it's not going to be a wild show car of a custom. I want it to look like something that somebody would have built that they still had to drive regularly, so it can't be completely over the top. Today I'm going to kind of ease back into the project by giving me what should be a quick win. There's no rust issues on the trunk lid. Any brown you see is either very slight surface rust or primer. But it does need some custom work done. On the trunk lid here, there's the lock here, and then there's holes from the old trim here. And then there's a hole here, I don't remember what it was from. Oh, right, these three holes are the emblem. I'm keeping the emblem, though I'm not sure I'm keeping in this location. I'm pondering shifting it all the way down into the corner here. There was a plan possibly to hide the lock behind it, but the more I think about it, I don't want it here. So I think what I may end up doing is just shifting the entire emblem as far into this corner as I can get it and still have it look right, just to free up the open space. These are all getting welded up because I'm not keeping the emblem, the big emblem that was back here, and then I'm recessing this lock assembly. Most people shave the lock. I like having locks there just because I don't trust the remote poppers and whatnot. I just like having a key to open it, but I want it to look a little smoother. So what I'm going to do is build a custom piece to replace this lock that dimples the metal in and has the lock basically flush with the exterior. I think that'll be a nice, neat little custom touch. After that's done, the trunk lid needs nothing but to be finished, stripped, sanded down, and primed and painted. So that's why this is kind of a quick win panel. So the lock on the Oldsmobile, this is the lock. It don't come in the black, that's just more of the stupid gunk that's all over the entire car. But this I cut out of the Oldsmobile parts car. This is the slot on the trunk that this fits into, and it's very specifically, it only fits in one way so that the lock can only go in upright. What I'm planning to do is take another piece of metal, take a dimple die, which you'll get to see in progress, punch a hole in this and dimple it inwards, and then feed the lock through it and center this in the back, and then weld it on. So then it'll hold the lock the exact same way, and it'll all be aligned. And then because I've made these two lines that I'm going to use for my drilling, I have made a corresponding couple of lines on the car where the lock is so that I can cut a section of that out, fit this behind it, line the lines up, figure out where I need to trim this, and make myself a perfect piece that should weld in the exact same position as the existing lock on the car. Hopefully, if this all goes the way I hope it does, it'll actually be a fairly easy process to put this in. And all it will do is shrink the lock back in by about its depth. So at most, I'll have to trim off a little of this where it fits into the lock mechanism. I'm not even sure. I think this might even pass through. But that's literally all I should have to do to modify this and have it work exactly as it did when it was stock. So let's get to that. All right, so we're having things. So this is a dimple die. This is the Woodward Fab ones that combine the cutting and the dimpling into one operation, which I really like. But basically what happens is you drill a hole big enough for this bolt, you feed it through, and then you sandwich it between these, and this one punches a hole in the panel, and then this one and this one put this dimpling in. The main purpose of dimpling die is it makes metal stronger than the sheet as alone while reducing weight. You take out you know, the disc's worth of metal weight, but this is actually stronger and less flexible than it was when it was just a flat sheet. This one, when I dimpled it, the distance here was small enough that it pulled it and twisted it. So this is not perfectly flat. The whole thing's a little warped. So I tried it on a bigger sheet, figuring it'd have less ability to do that. And that seems to have worked better, but for some reason the die wasn't cooperating and didn't slice this out, which the big hassle with that is the internal circle here is not flat. Like, this one's mostly flat with one little slightly raggedy corner, which was probably the last bit of this to cut. But the other one just flat out didn't cut and is a little bit higher on that side. So I think what I'm going to do is come in here with an air cutoff disc, slice this off, and see if I can sort of then sand the entire thing flatter, and then attempt to fit the lock, because even though this one's not perfect, you can see the general thing is, you know what? I have the wrong one. Anyway, this is the wrong size. I do this every single time I do this. I forget that the section in the middle that punches a hole is not the right one. This is the dimple die I should be using. Sorry for the zero break there in my thought flow, but this is the right one. That's the wrong. The reason I have three is I kept ordering the wrong size, because none of them tell you the finished hole opening. This is the one I actually should be using, and taking this one apart makes me realize this one was wrong. That's why it didn't cut properly. This should be the other way around. Sorry, you're getting kind of stream of consciousness figuring out my screw-ups here. This should have been like this, and then like that, because then this is cutting against this lip long before the two start compressing each other, and this lip moves much further past the edge of that. So I screwed both of these up, but I learned, I had figured this all out, you know, better part of a year ago when I bought these, but it had all fallen out of my head in the intervening time. So I'm just going to test punch so I make sure that this is the right one before I go any further. New hole punch. That one was much flatter. I can't use this one because, again, it's too close to the edge, so it warped. But this one is good enough for my test, which is lock in the right configuration, and then lock fitted into there. And I don't know how well I can get this on camera, but it basically ends up being flush with the surface. You have a dimple, but it makes the lock right against, flat against the surface. And there's just a tiny little bit of play in this. Basically enough, it's going to end up being enough for the paint and primer and whatnot. But the way I'm going to center that is I'm going to wrap this with some tape until it just barely can be crammed in there. And then, you know, that'll center the lock, which will allow me to weld. I'm going to have to obviously cut a bunch of this down. And I suspect I'm only going to tack this in a few places because I feel like this will warp too much if I try and put too much heat in welding it all around. I'll just weld it in a couple spots so that it's solid, and then it'll be seam sealed. But I need to get a new panel. So I'm going to put you back in time lapse and try that. All right, so it is built. I apologize for the compressor noise in the background. I had one major problem, which was some of the welds at the bottom got a little too hot and actually burned through the metal and bubbled up over here. So this bottom edge is not perfectly smooth anymore because I had to grind those welds away. But that's something I'm going to have to use some filler in this area anyway because of welding in the patch. So I'll just smooth that out with filler at the same time and that'll be fine. But this fits in there exactly how it should. It is flush. This is nice and solid. I'm gonna put some seam sealer in between those two pieces to get that to be completely waterproof in there. But yeah, I'm very happy with this. Now we need to transfer this over to the car. All right, so it decided not to record. Yay. But I cut out the original lock section here. And I've got that piece that I made behind it, and I'm currently trying to fit that. So basically what I'm doing is putting the section that I cut out back in here. Ah! The nice thing is I have a little bit of fudge room because it's just a rod that goes back. I don't have a lot of fudge room, but I got a little bit of fudge room. So. So the one good thing is because this is off the other car, I have another one here now. It means if I completely F this up, I can try again. Still gonna try not to. Alrighty. Cleaned up the hole in the car with the file. Quickly cleaning this up. I'm just basically trying to get all the little burrs off the edge so they don't interfere with my ability to test it. And then, yep, it's still a little bit large, which was intentional. Alrighty, I got that in there. That now fits. I'm going to very carefully grind a little bit more away just to give myself proper penetration for the welds because it's pretty tight. Alright. Sucker welded in place. I'm going to use a pair of magnets to get it located and then tack the other two corners basically, and then that'll let me be able to pull the magnets off and do the two magneted corners. The most important part and the hardest part about this is going to be getting the two panels at the same height exactly so that there's no step up or step down. And I feel like that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. Not 100% sure. Yes, the lock is in the right orientation. So here we are. It's all in and the metalwork portion is done. I'm very happy with it. It's definitely not perfect. There's definitely some waviness, though most of it feels like it's actually from my grinding more than anything else. And there's definitely a little ridge right here where I haven't ground enough, annoyingly. But overall, really good, really happy. The edge in here is going to need just a little bit of cleanup as well, but this is all going to need a skim coat of filler anyway, so none of that really worries me. And then here is my lock. There we go, finally. Lock is in, and as you can see, it's nearly flush. It's also just a really cool effect to have the lock recessed in like that. It's a very minor little thing, but I think it looks really cool. I think it's going to look really great when it's the shiny lock against the color. This is stainless, so I can polish this right back up again just to get this paint off and clean it. But yeah, that came out really well. I'm really happy with that. It's a tiny little touch, but it's definitely different. People who know cars will notice a difference there. And, you know, it'll probably escape the notice of like 99% of people, but the people who do notice it will probably, you know, yeah. So next I have all these holes to weld up. What I'm going to do is cut little tiny circles. They're not going to be very good, but I'm going to cut little circles just to have some material in there. Put a magnet on them from the back and fill them in. And that just means I don't have to fill the entire thing with weld, which will reduce warpage. And then once I've got these all filled, I'm going to grind them all flat. And that'll do me for today. And there I am. I went over this with some 80 grit just to sort of get a better idea of what everything looks like. These are all low spots that are going to need a little filler, but I'm really happy with how this all came out. If you run your hand across the panel, it kind of sucks in here, like the entire panel bows in slightly towards the lock. But it feels like a consistent shape. Like it doesn't feel warped, it just feels like it's definitely lower right there. I think the panel had more of a bevel than I realized, and so putting a perfectly flat piece in there has now created a slight distortion, but I don't think it's going to be an issue. But yeah, all of my trim holes are welded up, all of my emblem holes are welded up, and the lock has been recessed. So this panel is now ready for final body work, basically. So I'm sure some of you are wondering if the lock works now that it's been modified like this. That occurred to me after I finished filming everything else, so the answer is yes. Hey all, we're back on the Oldsmobile trunk today. So in case you didn't see it, the video of it, the reason it's all shiny and smooth like this is I got myself one of these Bauer SCTs and finished stripping it and polished off all the surface rust. I have also gone in and seam sealed the tiny little gap between the plate that the lock attaches to and the dimple. I basically just smeared a bunch of seam sealer in here, then just went back with a paper towel and some Prepsol and wiped all but what was in the little crack out. So that's now waterproofed around there, and that's all set. So basically what I'm going to do now is get some filler on this and then come back later and sand it off. In addition to what I welded up and the area around this, there's a small ding here, there's a small ding there. Sorry, and no, that's the ding, that's just a mark. But I'm just going to give this whole area the thinnest of skim coats, because there's also some very fine pitting that was from rust forming around the old emblem. I've already treated it, but I just want to fill it back in so that it's smooth. Shouldn't take much, probably one application because none of this is really dire. And then this will be ready to put primer on and wait for paint. Another day. This is all dry. I managed to put my hand in it right there, so we'll find out if that's a problem or not. What I'm going to do is slap some 320 onto DA, and we're going to take 99% of this right back off again and see where we are. I'm hoping against hope that I can get this in one go, but odds are small. This bit's going to be interesting to sand. But yeah, I'm just going to get to it. Alright, the primer's still drying and it didn't go on perfectly well, probably because I didn't get all the dust off, but it's enough to generally give me the idea that, I mean, it looks pretty good. I can see the outline of the spots just because the Bondo absorbs the primer a little different. There's a little spot right under there. Probably can't even get it to focus on. There's a little hole right there. That's going to need a tiny bit of glazing putty. But obviously I have to sand this once it's fully dry, but I think it might actually be good in one go. I am going to be putting on epoxy primer. So what I'm probably going to end up doing when I get to that stage, and this primer is going to pretty much all come off. This was just using it as a kind of a guide coat to see where I was. I think what I'm going to do is when I primer this the first time, I'm going to get a nice thick extra coat in this area so that I can come back in and sand it down some to smooth it out, make sure everything's cool. But I think I'm good. I think this is all pretty much taken care of. So other than final body work, I think I can check this panel off. So there I am, one panel down, so many more to go. Talk to you later. Bye.